Ever wonder what happened after 2001: A Space Odyssey? You might be shocked to find out there's actually a sequel, and that's just the start. We've dug up some sci-fi follow-ups that really make you question, wait, they made a sequel to that? Most people first met Angelina Jolie in Hackers. You know, the cult cyber thriller that also introduced her to future husband Johnny Lee Miller. But 2 years before Hackers, she was already kicking butt in a sci-fi action flick, Cyborg 2. Surprised? So are most people, because this direct-to-video sequel is as forgotten as it gets. The original Cyborg, 1989, starred Jean-Claude Van Damme as a bodyguard protecting a woman from a villain. It wasn't a huge hit, but it did well enough to earn a sequel, grossing $10 million on a less than $1 million budget.
Not bad. Mine's not as sweet.
That's funny.
Not all forgotten sequels go straight to video. Some get a theatrical release and even a bit of attention before fizzling out. Case in point, The Year We Make Contact. A sequel to Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey, widely considered one of the best sci-fi films of all time. This movie came out in 1984. But unlike 2001, which was Kubrick's passion project, the sequel had no input from Kubrick at all. The movie wasn't bad, critics actually liked it, but it never had a chance of matching the legacy of its predecessor. And while The Year We Make Contact did okay at the box office, it even beat out Dune and Starman for a time, it's now mostly forgotten.
It's funny, I've been thinking. You know what I miss? I miss green. Trees and grass. I love green.
I love a hot dog.
When Starship Troopers first came out, a lot of people didn't quite get the satire. Directed by Paul Verhoeven, it's now regarded as a cult classic for its biting critique of fascism and militarization. But the sequel, Hero of the Federation, missed the memo completely. It traded in the satire for a straightforward action flick about soldiers fighting bugs, and it was a massive misstep. Critics blasted it, and even the third movie couldn't recover from the damage done.
Let's go!
There's too many of them, Dex!
You gotta tell him what you saw, Sahara! You gotta tell him about the new bug!
You stay here, you'll die!
Murderers don't go home!
Tarsem Singh made a name for himself in the early 2000s with The Cell, a visually stunning, mind-bending sci-fi thriller that had critics praising its surreal dream sequences, but not much else. It wasn't a huge hit, but it did okay, so naturally, someone decided a sequel was necessary. Enter The Cell 2, a movie no one asked for. If The Cell was about diving into dreams, The Cell 2 was like watching a rejected script for a Saw sequel, with a psychic trying to stop a killer by entering his mind. It was named one of the worst movies of 2009, and rightfully so. It came and went without a trace. War Games was a classic 80s movie about a teenage hacker who accidentally starts playing war games with a games with a supercomputer AI. It spawned a whole franchise, from novels to video games. But then, nothing. That is, until 2008, when out of nowhere came War Games, The Dead Code, a direct-to-video sequel that nobody knew about or wanted. The movie tried to stick to the hacker formula with a new young lead, but it never figured out if it was a remake or a sequel. Either way, it bombed. Some sequels take a while to get made, but this one took 43 years. Released in 1996 as a made-for-TV movie, this sequel to the 1953 sci-fi classic tried to follow in the footsteps of its predecessor, but it barely made a ripple. The original movie was groundbreaking in its day with early use of 3D and a story written specifically for the screen by sci-fi legend Ray Bradbury. The sequel looked like a 90s TV movie in every way, and aside from a small VHS run, it's been forgotten ever since. The original Lawnmower Man may have been marketed as a Stephen King adaptation, but in reality it barely had anything to do with King's story. What started as a movie about a cyber god was slapped with King's name, sparking a lawsuit and gaining cult status thanks to its early CGI. So it's not that surprising that a sequel exists. Beyond Cyberspace ditches much of the original's charm, including its digital villain, who was recast and stripped of his all-digital form. Critics and audiences weren't impressed, and it flopped at the box office.
Every time anyone logs onto Virtual Light Uplink, we'll know every goddamn thing about them. Now, show me all hypocritical Democrats making over $300,000 a year.
Donnie Darko was a slow burn, finding its true fanbase on home video, but it became a cult classic. Naturally, a sequel followed in 2009, without any involvement from the original creators. The sequel focuses on Donnie's younger sister Samantha, but fans rejected it outright. Critics panned it, and even original creator Richard Kelly disowned it, claiming he hadn't seen it and had no plans to. This is one sequel that proves sometimes it's better to leave a classic alone. If you grew up with cable in the 80s, Cocoon was one of those feel-good sci-fi films that seemed to be on every day. The story of elderly folks discovering the secret to immortality thanks to some friendly aliens was heartwarming and became a surprise hit, winning Oscars and becoming a TV staple. But the sequel, Cocoon: The Return, didn't enjoy the same success. The plot brought back the aliens and humans, but the magic was gone. While the original remains a nostalgic favorite, few people remember, or bother revisiting, the disappointing sequel.
David, your grandparents are not in space. They were lost at sea. They've been dead for 5 years. Hello, darling.
The Butterfly Effect was Ashton Kutcher's attempt to break away from rom-coms, playing a college student who could time travel within his own past. The film was a hit, but the same can't be said for its sequel. Released just 2 years later, The Butterfly Effect 2 didn't even get a US theatrical release, and it was quickly forgotten. Despite its lackluster box office run, DVD sales somehow justified a third entry. But by then, the franchise had fizzled out with the original film's fan base dwindling.